Today we are going to learn about solving proportions and similar figures. A proportion is an equation that states that two ratios are equal. An equation that states that two ratios are equal. And so the instructions that we are going to follow state that to solve for a proportion, you must isolate the variable and make sure that the variable is not in the denominator. So your goal when solving proportions is to isolate the variable and to make sure that the variable is not in the denominator. So solve the following proportions. Simplify final answers to simplest form. And show all work. So for number 1, we have 7 divided by 8 as a fraction, because we're dealing with ratios here, equals m divided by 12. 7 divided by 8 equals m divided by 12. So when we're solving proportions, because we have two fractions or two ratios that are equal to each other, we now can use a skill called cross multiplying. Okay, it's a skill that allows us to simplify the process of solving for the missing value. Okay, so we're going to cross multiply. Similar to cross simplifying, but we're multiplying here. So that means we're going to take a value from the numerator and we're going to multiply it across to the denominator. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So we get 7 times 12 equals 8 times m. And then we can use our calculator to figure out that 7 times 12 is 84 for our brains. And then we get 8m. Now we have taken away the need for us to worry about the fractions right now, because now we have two things that do not appear as fractions. But we do need to divide by 8 to isolate the variable. Now, if we look at 84 divided by 8, that does not simplify nicely all the way, but they are even numbers. So therefore, I do have the means of simplifying the fraction. which gets me an answer of 21 halves. And just as a clarification, they should remain as fractions for your final answer. Okay, so no decimals and no mixed numbers. And I'm going to show you why this one works the way it does. Now, typically what we used to do, or what we could also still do, is multiply by the reciprocal. Okay. When we multiply by the reciprocal, we're trying to remove the denominator of the variable. So multiplying by 12 divided by 1 on both sides would allow for that 12 to cancel out from the denominator. And then we would get a similar situation. 12 times 7. Oops, sorry. Which is 84 times 1 divided by 1 times 8, which is 8, would equal m, which again would simplify to 21 halves. So both methods work, but in most cases, the cross multiplying will make your problem go a little bit quicker. Let's try number 2. X divided by 7 equals 4 divided by 5. So in order to solve for X, we're going to cross multiply. And so we get X times 5, which we would rewrite as 5X. And we have 7 times 4, which is 28. Okay, you don't need to write this first line up here. Okay, that was just showing you how you were multiplying it. Then we simplify to isolate our variable by dividing by 5. In this case, 28 fifths doesn't simplify, so therefore my answer would just remain as 28 fifths. Let's try our next question. Now, the question we want to think about in this next couple examples is, what if the variable is in the denominator? How is that going to change the method in which we're solving? What if the variable is in the denominator? So I'm going to have, for number 3, 4/3 equals 8 divided by x. So using our first method of cross multiplying, I would multiply 8 times 3 and 4 times x. So I get 4x equals 24. And I divide by 4 on both sides. And x equals 6. Now, much like number 1, I'm going to show that on the screen again. Keep in mind that we could do it either method, cross multiplying or multiplying by the reciprocal. So again, I'm going to show you what happens if you wanted to use the multiply by reciprocal method. Either method is acceptable. So if I were to multiply by the reciprocal, keep in mind that we want to get rid of a denominator where the variable is. But in this case, I'd be multiplying by x divided by 1 to get the variable out of the denominator. However, that's not going to be as simple as the first one, because now we're going to get 4x divided by 3 equals 8. So although I did get the variable out of the denominator, I'm still going to have more to do. So therefore, I'm going to have to then multiply by the denominator, or the reciprocal of 3 from the denominator. Which then gets me 4x equals 24, and then finally dividing by 4. So as you can see, the process of cross multiplying helps to make that process a little bit quicker and easier. But again, either method is acceptable. Let's have you try number 4 on your own. You may use the method of cross multiplying or multiplying by the reciprocal. Pause to try. So let's look at number 4. 3 divided by y equals 5 divided by 3. So go ahead and attempt number 4 and see how you do. Let's find out how you did. So, using this method of cross multiplying, like such, I'm going to get 5y equals 9. And I'm going to divide by 5 on both sides. My answer should be 9/5. Now, if you preferred the multiply by the reciprocal method, this is how you would complete this method. I'm going to multiply by y over 1 on both sides. Which gives us 3 equals 5y divided by 3. Then I'm going to need to multiply by 3 on both sides. And that just happens to be a coincidence. It's not always multiplying by 3. So we get 9 equals 5y, which would then yield the same answer. But depending on which method makes more sense for you, you should have still gotten 9/5. Let's go ahead and try a word problem with proportions. Number 5. An iPod has 2 gigs of storage and can hold 500 songs. Another iPod has 80 gigs of storage. How many songs can it hold? So the first thing you need to do is set up a proportion. So we're going to compare what we know. So the first iPod has 2 gigs of storage with 500 songs. So we're going to set it up like we set up our work the other day, in fraction form. And what we know about the other iPod is that it has 80 gigs, but we don't know how many songs it has. So I'm going to put X. Okay, it has X amount of songs. And as you notice, I have gigs on top and songs on bottom. So it must be set up so where the same units are on top and the same units are on bottom when we're setting up two equal proportions. Okay, we don't want them opposite. We're not trying to cancel out the units. We're just setting up the units to be in matching parts. Okay, so the units are the same on top and bottom. But when we go to solve, we really don't need the units in there because we know we're solving for songs. So I'm just going to pull out the math portion of it to solve. So I'm going to say 2 divided by 500 equals 80 divided by X. And now it's going to look like a problem like 3 and 4, where I can cross multiply and solve. So I'm going to cross multiply. And I'm going to get 2x equals, and we're going to use our calculator, 500 times 80, unless you can do that in your head, is 40,000. And we divide by 2. So x equals 20,000. Now, because it's a word problem, we do need to make sure we have units. So therefore, x equals 20,000 songs. So again, units are needed. And so that's how we can do a word problem with proportions. I'm going to write down number 6 and let's see how you do with that one. The currency in Croatia is the excuse me, sorry. The currency in Croatia is the kuna. The current exchange rate is approximately $1 for every 7.71 kuna. Again, 7.71 kuna. At this rate, how much kuna would you get for 25 US dollars? So again, you want to set up a proportion with matching parts, and then we're going to cross multiply. First, go ahead and set up a proportion. What do you think we can do with the information provided to us? Now remember, you don't need to know how to use the exchange rate with the international money, just set up the proportion. Let's see how you did. So first we know we have $1 US And the exchange rate is 7.71. And we're just gonna put Puna on bottom. And we know that we have 25 US dollars, but we have an unknown amount of Puna. So we're gonna do our exchange rate by using the proportion of just the numbers. So if I do that, I'm just gonna have 1 divided by 7.71 equals 25 divided by x. And then we use our cross multiplication skills to solve for our variable. So 25 times 7.71 in our calculator says that x equals 192.75. But because it's a word problem, we need to label it. And these are kunas. So that would be my answer. Okay. As we move forward, going into the next part of the notes, we're going to talk about similar figures. Now, similar figures use proportions a lot, so that is why this two topics work together. Let's talk about what is a similar figure. A similar figure is when you have two figures that have the same shape, but not necessarily the same size. And so our instructions are going to be all of the following are similar figures. Solve for the missing side length. Simplify final answers to simplest form. And always show all work, just like any other problem. Okay, so we have an image of two similar figures. Okay, now again, they have the same shape, but they're not necessarily the same size. And something else we know about similar figures is that they have proportional sides, which is where we can set up ratios. So the information we're provided is the following. And we want to solve for that missing side length of the second triangle. And so we want to set up a proportion. Now, with similar figures, there's lots of different ways you could set up a proportion. You could set up a proportion between the big triangle to the little triangle, to the diagonal sides, to the flat sides of the bottom of the base. Okay, there's lots of different ways you could go about it. Most commonly, students work from left to right and set up a ratio of the first image and set it equal to a ratio of the second. So that would look like 12 divided by 20. So the side of the big triangle divided by the base of the big triangle equals the side of the small triangle divided by the base of the small triangle. But again, this isn't the only way we could have done that. I could have also had the base on top. I could have had 20 divided by 12. So the base divided by the side equals the base divided by the side. This sets it up to where the variables in the numerator. There's still an option. Okay. And less common, you could also have a proportion set up between the types of sides. So I could have 12 divided by 3, as in the big side divided by the little side equals the big base divided by the little base. And similar, I could have the little side divided by the big side equals the little base divided by the big base. All of these are options. You only have to set up one, but there are so many different ways you can set it up. You just need to pick one and work with it. So again, there are multiple options to set up a proportion with similar figures. You just need to make sure they are set up in matching order. Meaning, I would not have the side of the big divided by the little base. That wouldn't make sense. So you either have the first triangle compared to the second triangle, like we did on top, or you could have the side compared to the base of big and small at the same time. But go ahead and pick one of them and we're going to solve. I'm going to go ahead and pick that first one. 12 divided by 20 equals 3 divided by x. Then I'm going to do my cross multiplication. And I get 12x equals 60 divided by 12, and x equals 5. Now, x would equal 5 in any of these proportions that we set up here. But again, you only need to complete it one time. I'm just simply showing you that there are multiple options for you to do so. Let's go ahead and look at number 8. And I do the best to make sure that these actually look similar. Okay, so here we have our two similar figures. What I want you to do first is to set up a proportion and then solve. And I'll give you some time to do that. Go ahead and pause the video here. Let's see how you did. So one way you could have set up a proportion here is by setting up a proportion of the tall side of the small one divided by the base of the small one, equaling the tall side of the big one divided by the base of the big one. And again, that's just one of the ways you could have done it. Let's see when we cross multiply if you ended up with the same answer if you had set up the proportion differently. So when I cross multiply, I'm going to get 6x equals 9 times 24, which is 216, divided by 6. And x equals 36. So if you did not get x equals 36, something got set up wrong in your proportion. Again, you want to make sure you have matching parts. So small box to big box, side to side, base to base. There's always going to be at least a handful of ways you can do it. But if you got 36, then you're good to go. Let's try our next one. Now, as you notice in this one, it looks a little silly because one's upside down. Or the second, I should say, triangle is upside down. Okay. And so sometimes they will give you these on homework quizzes and tests or state tests, just to make sure that you're paying attention to the order and not just simply writing down numbers. So if we go ahead and try this one, 16 is the slanted side of this one, and 22 is the base of this triangle. So I'm going to say 16 divided by 22. Now, if I look at this triangle, it is kind of upside down, but you could always turn your paper around. So this is your base, and you'll see that now this is our slanted side. Okay, now technically anything could be slanted, but 11 is clearly not a base. Sorry, did a lot of spinning on that. So technically, if we're thinking about our slanted side, this would be equal to 11 divided by x being the base. Okay, because x is clearly with the straight side, which is where the 22 is. Then we're going to cross multiply. And I haven't said it so far, but you don't need to use two different colors. Obviously, I'm doing two colors to make it visually appealing and easier to see. You can just use your pencil. So we get 16x equals 242. And when I divide by 16, we should notice in the calculator that we get a decimal, okay? So that means we actually just want to simplify our fraction. We do not want to leave a decimal. We want to just simplify our numbers. So both of them are divisible by 2. So that's what I'm going to do first. So 242 divided by 2, that gives me 121. And 16 divided by 2 is 8. Now from here, 121 is no longer even. So really I would just need to see, could it divide by 2, 4, or 8, which it's not going to because it's not even. So therefore this would be my simplified version of my answer. One more problem for today, and we're going to do a word problem with similar figures. So for my instructions, for the following, create a drawing to represent the situation given. Label the different aspects of the drawing. Then solve for the proportion. If needed, round to the nearest hundredth. And write the correct units and show work. So again, to clarify, When we're doing with just the proportions or just the similar figures, your answer should be fractions. And when you're working with the word problems, you can have decimals. All right, so for number 10, we have a little bit of a situation. It tells us that the sun's rays shine on a light pole and a student at the same time. The light pole has an 8-foot shadow, while the 5-foot 3-inch student has a 3-foot shadow. How tall is the light pole? So we're going to create a little image to represent this. So I have my sun. Okay, and then we have a light pole, which we're not going to make fun of our drawing. Here's my little light pole. And it has a shadow, right? Shadow down here. And then we have a little student. And they have a shadow. Now let's label what we know. We know that the light pole has an 8-foot shadow. And we know that the 5-foot 3-inch student has a 3-foot shadow. What we don't know is how tall is the light pole. Now, before I can go about solving, I actually need to make sure everything is in the same units. Right now I have feet, and then feet, inches. So we need to convert the inches into a decimal for my feet. So if I have 5 feet and 3 inches, I need to consider the fact that this is 3 out of 12 inches that make a foot. So 3 divided by 12 gives me 5.25 feet. So again, because I have different units, I have to consider that this is out of 12 inches. And 3 divided by 12 is 0.25. So I have a 5.25 foot student. Now I can set up my proportion. So we have a light pole with an 8-foot shadow, which is consistent with our 5.25 foot student and their 3-foot shadow. Go ahead and simplify and see what you get. So we're going to cross multiply. So I get 3x equals 5.25 times 8, which is 42. Divide by 3, and x equals 14. Now, 14 is representing the height of the flagpole, or sorry, the light pole, and it's all in feet, so therefore this would be a 14-foot light pole. That is the end of the notes. Good luck on your assignment.